Everyone, welcome back to my channel. So my name is Delphi. Anyway, today the girlfriend of George Floyd took to the stand. She was very emotional. She said the first time they met was when she went to a Salvation Army facility to see the father of her children, and he refused to come downstairs to meet her in the lobby. She says that George came to her, and this is what he said to her.
At one point, Floyd came up to me and Floyd has this great, deep Southern voice, raspy. He's like, "Sis, you okay, sis?" And I wasn't okay. I said, "No, I'm just waiting for my son's father." He said, "Well, can I pray with you?" I was so tired. We had been through so much, my sons and I. And this kind person just to come up to me and say, "Can I pray with you?"
The prosecution painted this picture of George loving his mother and being very, very caring for others. And the defense came up and started talking about George saving his girlfriend's number on his phone as Mama. So they were saying that George was talking about Mama, even though they didn't say that. That was what they were insinuating, that George was talking about his girlfriend when he was crying for his mama. But the prosecution had to come back, re-examine the witness, and just basically establish that the mama George was talking about was his mother, not this mama. So they asked her about George's mama.
He seemed so sad. He didn't have the same kind of bounce that he had. He was devastated. He loved his mom so much, and I knew that. He talked about her all the time.
And she said that both her and George were addicts. They were using opioids. She said the reason why they started using opioid was because respectively, both of them had suffered with different injuries. He had spot injury, had problems with his neck and with his back, and these are painkillers that he became addicted to. Same thing with her. She said there were times when he was clean, there were times when she was clean, but there were times when they, went back to taking these drugs. And the defense wanted a time lapse because they definitely wanted to paint the picture of George taking drugs just before he died, because there are cases that he had a lot of drugs in his system or some kind of drug that would have caused his heart to stop beating. But on the other hand, the prosecution is trying to say that George's death has nothing to do with the drugs that were found in his system, that it was Derek who had killed him by putting his knee on his neck. The girlfriend said that George was always up and bouncing, but that at some other times he was not really making sense when he spoke. This was what she had said to the FBI in her previous statement, and that statement was really used against her today. In all, she sounded very credible, I think, because she owned up to the fact that both her and George had addictions, and she had spoken openly about how they had bought different drugs. The defense capitalized on the fact that they could have bought different drugs, that caused George to have a cardiac arrest. So they took her back to the kind of drugs that they had been taking, and she said they would normally take opioid, but that when they were desperate, they would take anything. Now, she didn't talk about the desperation and other drugs in today's hearing. However, when FBI had spoken to her prior to this time in her transcript, she had confirmed that they would take other drugs when they were desperate. So the defense used that to their advantage today to say, listen, you would normally take not just opioid, you would take other things. And they talked about a time when George had a heroin overdose. And this was in her transcript before. She was trying to distance herself from George having the overdose, but then it was very clear because the defense must have his medical notes in any event, and they would be very sure that he had a heroin overdose. So it was clear that it wasn't just opioid that he was using, there were other things. Now, what the defense did was they talked about a Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall is the other person that you can see in the car with George when he was arrested. And what the defense were basically saying was that Mr. Hall was the one who could have sold whatever drug was in George's system. Possibly not. But the reason why they planted him there was because even though George and his girlfriend had been using opioid, at some point they had bought a drug that they reacted badly to. She tried to say that she could only speak for herself, that these particular drugs were stimulants rather than opioid, which makes you calm and, relaxed, because opioids are like painkillers. But then she says that these drugs that were sold to her, and she says she doesn't know where George bought the first batch from. She says that they were stimulants and they kept her up all night. Now, to the second batch that she had taken, and at another time, she was trying to say that she didn't know who George had bought it from. But in her transcript, she had said to the FBI that it was Mr. Hall who had given George the drugs, because when George was speaking to the seller or dealer on the phone, she had heard Mr. Hall's voice when they went to the hotel to buy the drugs. This was sometime before George died. This particular batch, again, was a stimulant and it was sold by Mr. Hall. They would normally try to buy prescription drugs, so they would buy from people who had a legal prescription, but when they couldn't get prescription, they would buy anything because they were desperate. She said she couldn't remember saying that, and there were many things that were in the transcripts that she could kind of remember ever saying when she spoke to the FBI. But then the defense read her transcript to her, and it was there that she said they would buy anything when they were desperate. She said that George was physically, fit. The prosecution asked her about his fitness level. She said that he had a sports injury. He was into sports. Even with the sports injury, he would be able to, ride his bicycle. He loved to do his sit-ups, to carry weights, press-ups. And that he had no problems with breathing because the defense were trying to say that the drugs gave him shortness of breath or made him have shortness of breath. But she was saying that he had no problems with breathing, that he actually tested for COVID but before he died, but that he recovered from this. And she said that she speculated that it was Miss Hill, that's the person who was seen in the car with George, who had given George maybe some fake drugs. But all in all, the prosecution is trying to paint a picture of George being quite fit, quite strong before he dies. Someone who rides bicycles and runs around and, is loved in the community, walks even, or he was walking before he lost his job. A father loved and, very nice guy who would go to someone and pray for the person when the person is crying, like the girlfriend was crying before they met. But the defense, on the other hand, had what I would say was a strong case today. I think for the first time I could see, their kids going somewhere, because they're basically saying this man had different drugs in his body. He would buy from prescription drugs to drugs that he could get anywhere. And these were the drugs that were in his body and caused for his heart to stop. And that was why he had, substance coming out from the side of his mouth. That was why he was behaving erratic and all of that. Anyway, it's been really nice. And I hope you have a nice Easter, happy resurrection. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye for now. Bye.